To get started, let's add a particle system component. Now, as I've explained before, all components can be added to any game object. However, by default, you can also create a game object with that component added by default, which can be found in the Game Object file menu. If you go to Create Other, you will see a particle system. You can also add this directly in the hierarchy, Create Particle System, or you can create an empty game object and add a particle system component to this. I'm going to create an empty game object with a particle system attached to it as a component by default. And there it is. Now if we go into our view type and then go into wireframe, we will see that every one of these graphics, even though we see them as these white orbs, are actually a quad with a texture applied to them. This is called a sprite-based particle system. There's two types, Sprite and Voxel. Voxel are not used in modern games because they are too performance expensive, but in most film packages they are pretty much default. So if I go into Blender here and I look at some effects that I was creating before, we will still see a emitter of particles, but we will also see this little square surrounding it. This is something called a domain. It is basically an extender of the particles, which would then be rendered as three-dimensional pixels, also called voxels. As our hardware gets better, games will transition more into voxels than a sprite-based system, because sprite-based systems have some inherent flaws. For example, considering each sprite is a quad with a texture, if for example you have a flamethrower shooting at a wall, and one of the quads goes halfway into the wall, you will get a weird effect of a flame that is halfway out and halfway in. In a voxel-based system, you can directly collide things with a mesh to get much more defined effects than using quads as textures. But hey, it's the limitations that bring out our creativity. Now, considering Unity is a sprite-based or a quad with a texture-based particle system, means that we need to go out and actually acquire some textures to put on top of those quads. So there's three ways that I can think of doing so. One, and this is definitely not for everyone, is to actually go out and, well, to start an effect of this somehow. Now, I used to be a performer, so I would not recommend to everyone to take some white gas and spill it on sand and then set it on fire. But perhaps you can find some texture that will do the same. So if you have some sort of fire effects here, then you can bring it in a video package and you can do an additive mask to do an alpha mask based on the grayscale effects here, and then extract this yellow and white and blue channels to be then used as a texture. Now, this is probably the most realistic looking effect. If you like, you can also draw your own textures one by one. You know, I'm not going to draw a masterpiece here, but if you're doing a 2D game that maybe has an 8-bit look, maybe drawing the texture one by one will be the way to go. Now, I took the effects from Blender and I thought those looked the best, and then I exported them out and I applied them as a render in a file that I have here. Got some explosion effects here. I wanted to get kind of a plasma ball looking effect. For the duration of this lesson, we'll mostly be working with Photoshop, and I'm going to show you a few features that you're probably not aware of. We'll be working with this to first extract some footage from video, and then how to work with just images, such as that I have here, to then extract them and put them together in a tiled texture, which then Unity can use. Let's get started with the video footage first. Photoshop actually had video editing capability since Photoshop 1.0, and you can bring in several clips from video footage. If you go into the File menu, go into Import, and then Video Frames to Layers, Photoshop will give you a dialog to actually find these files. So currently I'm going into my folder where I have the footage. There it is. And I'm just clicking open. So then Photoshop gives me a little dialog that says how much of the footage do you want to open, and I don't need all of this. I'm just going to need a little clip, considering the most amount of tiles that you want to import is probably 16. So probably pick the best footage and trim it to the smallest area possible, but try not to lose any information simultaneously. This is a pretty handy feature. It's this count rate to how many frames that it skips before going on to the next one, even though it'll give you a more serrated look. So in here, I can actually even skip this pretty wide, like say 30 frames. So I'll be skipping 1 frame every second. And then that's all we need to do, and just press OK or press Enter. Photoshop will then start importing all of these layers, all of these frames as an individual layer. Now you could go by these layers and then you can go File, Save As, and save them one by one, or you can use Photoshop's very handy automation function. If you don't know, you can write actions, you can write scripts in Photoshop without even writing a line of code, or use one of Photoshop's built-in scripts, which is what I'm going to be doing here. So to do so, you will go to File, Scripts, and then Export Layers to Files. Now, I'm not going to be exporting this here because simply it will take up time that we don't need to waste. I will do that with another image that I had. So I'm going to be exiting out of this video because I actually wasn't very satisfied in how it turned out. Maybe this would be better for a flamethrower, but for a jet engine, it doesn't really work out. So I'm going to close this, and I don't need to save this. Okay, I don't think I will need to save this beautiful flame that I drew earlier either. Don't save. And this is what I want to work with. Close tab. Okay, so here I've got several images imported from a render. I've got this plasma ball type looking effect. Now, as you can see here, I actually trimmed out some of the outside. I've got masks applied here to get more of the effects. I need to have a transparent background surrounding each and every single one of the images. Otherwise, you'll get some strange artifacts in Unity, which you'll see if some of the image overlaps outside of this border. And then considering Unity's particle shader, you can use your own shaders. We'll be using the default, uses an additive overlay. That means our alpha is simply going to be a black background. We'll be saving the image as a JPEG. So I've got all of these images. I'm pretty happy with how many I have here. And I'm going to use that script to get all of the images here out of the layers that I had. So File, Script, Export Layers to Files. I'm going to specify the directory. Already had a folder up here. Let's start with actually a new folder. We'll be call this work folder student. I have student work folder here, but I want to start off fresh. As you can probably tell, this is not the first time I'm recording this tutorial. Okay, I'm going to say open because this is just a directory. I won't be saving this. Now, this is asking me for a prefix. It won't be smoke, it'll be Jetfire. And then it's giving me a few more options. Visible layers only. You can probably tell what this does. If I were to check this, I would only get this black layer out. And then it's asking me what type of resolution that I want, or excuse me, what type of compression that I want to use here, and also how what's the bit rate of each compression. And now it's giving me PNG8 and PNG24. I do want to use PNG24, even though the files will be bigger, but afterward I'll be putting it in the JPEG anyway, so really it doesn't matter. I do suggest PNG 24 simply because of really even the alpha aliasing. It will look better. Okay. Transparency here, I'm going to leave it transparent because maybe later on I want to put it on a gray background instead of a black. I don't know. Why waste it? And then trim layers, it will trim out all of the alpha. I don't need that. And then I just click run. Okay, so there it goes. It's saving all the images one by one. Now Unity uses something called animated textures. That means the texture itself on every single quad progresses throughout the life of each particle. So what this means for us is that we need to create a file which is divided between a size of a cell between that width and length. So let's see that in an example. It might be a little confusing if I just say that in words. If I create a new file and I want 8 different cells, for example, one option that I can take is to take 4 cells across and 2 cells down, 4 rows or 4 columns, 2 rows. If the cell size that I choose will be 64 pixels, then I have to multiply 64 by 4, which is going to be 256. I can just leave this setting as it is. And then I need 2 rows, so I multiply 64 by 2, which I get 128. At resolution, you want to leave at 72 here. I press OK. Now, I need to divide this somehow. I need to create a grid so we will see 64 pixels in each one. Now I can do this in several ways. I can create a pattern here. I can change this to be exactly 64 by 64 pixels, create a second white rectangle which also be by 64 pixels, and then go in, this will actually, I will need this to be a square selection. So then I go into the edit file menu, and then I need to click on define pattern, and then I need to select this shape and then fill the background with this pattern, and then I will have some sort of grid. That's fine, that's a little tedious, and then plus I also have cruft in my patterns folder. I'm going to fill this with white. Second method would be just to manually constructing a grid and just doing the arithmetic in your head or using a calculator and counting off the amount of pixels per the field. So here I have 64 pixels, I'm halfway there. This is also a somewhat tedious way. The method that I suggest is an extension in Photoshop, and this is something that's called Guide. Now Guide, if you just Google it, you will be finding it online. It's a free extension, and you will need to install it via Adobe's Extension Manager, something that's super simple. It's simpler than installing Photoshop brushes. You simply double-click on the extension and it installs it for you. So if you do decide to take this path, let's find out how to use this, or at least the features that are necessary to us. Go into Window, Extensions, Guide. And there we have it. So we need to create 4 columns, 2 rows. These are the only 2 settings we need to worry about. 2 rows. And then that's it. Just press enter or press on this button. And we've created a grid. Very handy. So once the grid has been created, we need to go in and actually find the files in which we recently exported. Okay, so here we are. Here is my Finder menu, or Windows Explorer, whatever you use. I simply select all of these textures and I just drag them all in. I want them all to be the same size, so I just continue pressing enter for each one. And there we are. That's fine if they have a black background, because the background, the black, will actually be used as grayscale. I'm going to position them within the textures so all of them fit and there's no overflow of any part of this image. And I'm going to press enter. I'm going to fill the background as black because this is what I'm going to be using anyway. Okay, so here I have them. It goes from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. This might not be sequential for you. Why? Well, it's because Photoshop just simply edits out, it exports out the layers, but it doesn't know exactly how you exported it from your film or from your Blender render or from just hand-drawn textures. So we need to see which one is actually the last one. Let's check 4. As you can see, 4 is actually number 1. 4 is the latest. So what does it mean for us? That means 0 is going to be the latest. 0 is going to be the latest texture. I plan on doing some effects here in Photoshop later, so I know there's 8 tiles, but I only have 5 textures. So if 4 is number 1, that means we need to start dragging this out, starting from 4, going down. So I take 3, press Shift to get a good movement, and I start moving them. 2, 3, can't see very well. Where did it go? 3. Okay, and the last one here. Okay. So there we are. I want these to skew down a little bit, so I'm going to take a little break here and I'm going to apply a blur effect and then scale some of the image here because I want the effect to go out, but I want it to go out in a specific way to make it look a little special effects like and not necessarily extremely realistic. Okay, and this is looks pretty good, and I'm going to go ahead and save this out as just a JPEG file. Unity will convert them anyway, and it will compress them anyway. So we can just choose a higher compression, and then Unity can compress it further for us. So we can go in here and we can just select JPEG here, and we just call it jet sequence SEQ. Okay, compression of 10 is fine. I'm going to stop this lesson here, and next we're continuing on and bringing in all of these textures into Unity.